Unfortunately, this wasn't the only news about the Memphis Grizzlies that came out over the weekend. Brandon Clarke
Yeah.
is going to miss the rest of the season with a torn Achilles. Brandon Clarke has been like a sneaky, really, really important player for them, especially in the moments where Steven Adams has missed games here due to his injury. When you saw this news that Brandon Clarke is going to be out for the rest of the season, what was your immediate reaction to this?
Yeah, it's tough because he's a really good backup big man to have defensively, and the utility that he would bring in a postseason series because he's really smart. He knows how to handle a lot of different coverages rotationally, and he can guard both 4s and 5s in stretches because of his lateral quickness. I think that that's going to be a big loss for them. Maybe this leans into a little bit more of like Santi Aldama and Jaren Jackson Jr. together. Like they're not completely lost in terms of front court depth by any means. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a tough loss for them on the defensive end of the floor.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, I think, in regard to the Santi of it all. I do want to read off just some notes here statistically, right? So lineups with Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clarke, where they are the 4 and the 5 in the front court. Those lineups were a plus 12.9 per 100 possessions in nearly 500 minutes. That's like best in the league level numbers over the course of the full season. With Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson, it's plus 13.7. They just absolutely obliterate teams defensively. The thing is that they do have some replacements. They either just haven't used them or they haven't been as effective. And in playoff series, we know that the Grizzlies like to play smaller. They do end up sitting Steven Adams for larger swaths of games because of Steven Adams's offensive limitations a lot of the time in terms of being a true rim runner, being able to space the floor for Ja Morant. So here, Jaren Jackson and Santi Aldama, they've only played 42 minutes together at the 4 and the 5 this year. I don't know why up until recently they've started to test this a little bit, but I'm not totally sure why they haven't gone to this more. In those minutes, they played 42 minutes together like that. They're plus 42.4 net rating. Like they played really, really well in those minutes. And you would think that with how well Santi Aldama has played at times this season, you would want to go to that a little bit more just to test it out, to get it ready for the moments you might need it. Or in case something like this happens where you genuinely desperately need another option to be able to play a smaller ball front court situation. Jaren Jackson and Xavier Tillman, they're only a plus 4.4 net rating together. You do run into the same inherent limitations offensively with Xavier Tillman as you do with Steven Adams. It's just going to be really interesting to see what they end up doing in these front court scenarios, because I think the answer is Santi. I do. I think he is their best option here. I wonder also if we get, some Jake LaRavia moments here. I know that it is very possible that they start to utilize him a little bit more often. You look at their game against the Nuggets. He got 3 minutes in a blowout, but it was John Conchar, it was Luke Kennard getting a lot of the bench minutes in that game. You look at the game against the Rockets as well. It was John Conchar, it was a bit of Zaire Williams, but it was Brandon Clarke and Santi Aldama playing 20 to 25 minutes. LaRavia has been pretty good in the G League this year. I would look at him over someone like David Roddy, who's been up with the big team, to give them a little bit of a higher upside option that can really knock down shots. But at the end of the day, I think it's Santi, and or maybe like some smaller lineups with John Conchar and Dylan Brooks at the 3 and the 4 next to Bane and John Morant in the playoffs. I don't know. I mean, Zaire Williams has dealt with some injury stuff this year. They need Santi. They need to play Santi, and they need to just get the reps with him and Jaren and make sure it's going to be all good.
Totally agree. I think that that's part of the focus of the rest of this regular season, is trying to work through the kinks of how those two guys look together on the offensive end, on the defensive end. I'll give you kind of an alternative here, though, Sam, is trying to find ways to keep Steven Adams on the floor more. Do you think the acquisition of a guy like Luke Kennard, who helps space the floor so much more purely and has a very simple impact offensively, can help offset some of that, knowing that what Steven and Jaren bring on the back line defensively can make up for some of Luke's defensive issues.
Yeah, maybe. That's not impossible. I don't mind that in terms of being an option. I do worry about if he and John Morant together can hold up in a backcourt defensively. I think that there would be some real issues, even with that defensive insulation that they would have around the rim. Yeah, that would be my holdup with it. Can Luke Kennard and John Morant play together? And you're obviously going to play John Morant in the playoffs. So, yeah, I think that's tricky. Like, I think that it needs to be, maybe it's Conchar. Like, you hope that, Conchar keeps hitting 37% of his threes like he is so far this year, and playing intelligent high level basketball, and you play smaller. I think it's got to be Santi. I think Santi is the guy that's going to have to step up. I think he's been the best of this group so far this season. I think he has the highest upside of this group, outside of maybe Laravia long term. I do really still like Jake, even though I know he hasn't played a lot this year. I don't know if I want to trust a rookie necessarily either. I think I'd be more inclined to trust Santi, who's been within that organization for an extra year on top of it. So I think that's what it comes down to. Can Santi Aldama, handle these bigger lineups for the Grizzlies moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a mismatch nightmare that comes from having another 7-footer who can handle, stretch the floor a little bit, do different things offensively. Like, even if the defense isn't pristine with Aldama and Jaren Jackson on the floor, like it kind of changes the role that Jaren likes to play, because he's got to be a little bit more anchored towards the basket in certain regards. But man, the offensive trade-off might be worth it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, and they've been starting Xavier Tillman throughout this time, right? And Xavier's had some games. Like, I thought Xavier was probably their best player, maybe outside of Jaren and Ja at the very least. I thought he was the best player outside of those two in their game against Denver, where they lost by 16, and then the end result was the Ja Morant strip club incident. So maybe that is what you look to do.
Yeah, I mean, Tillman, again, he can give you some spot minutes here or there, but at the end of the day, I don't see him taking away from any Steven Adams minutes in the postseason. That if you're going to trust one of those guys who's a kind of non-shooting bigger option, you're going to go with Steven in a playoff setting.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, let's I will just close on this. This is the first real batch of like true adversity that this Grizzlies team with John Jaren as the core has faced. Like, all due respect to like some of the Dylan Brooks antics and, Desmond Bane's injuries and things like that. Des is great. And I don't mean to, minimize his impact on the team. He's phenomenal. But this is now like the real true test for them, I think, moving forward. And I think we're going to learn a lot about them. And we're going to learn a lot about Ja Morant in the coming weeks, in terms of how he reacts and responds to everything that has just occurred with him, and how this core reacts and responds. They have a tendency, in general, to go like us against the world. These are the guys that the Grizzlies front office loves, right? They love these dudes that are hyper competitive. They are hyper aggressive. Like, this is who they love, right? These are the players that they really, really enjoy drafting. And, they are back against the wall kind of guys. They feel like they always have their backs against the wall, even when it's not the case. And frankly, it hasn't been the case over the course of their run. How they act when their backs are actually against the wall now is going to be very, very interesting to me, because this is an organization that I think has immense upside. I often speak about how much respect I have for their front office. I think that it is an incredibly intelligent group of people that have built a really exciting, fun, young roster here. And I think that this is going to be a really, really, really good test for them moving forward, where we're going to learn a lot.